Hello.
All right, and welcome back to the Semi-Occasional Gaming Podcast. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, and I know I say that every time, but this time I really mean it. So today I'm joined by Pat Naoum, the indie developer and creator behind the new game, The Master's Pupil. So Pat, hi, how you going?
Good man, good. Really good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nah, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time. We're going to talk a bit about your new game, which launched a couple months back. But why don't you give us a real quick background, who you are, and a little bit about your game?
Yeah, well, as you said, I'm Pat Naoum. I'm a solo developer. I'm from Sydney, Australia. Currently traveling about on the road for about a year. And yeah, I made this game over the course of about 7 years. It's entirely hand painted, The Master's Pupil, and it's set inside Claude Monet's eyeball. So it's this kind of strange, semi-surreal world, but it's all kind of hand painted and lush kind of painted textures. And it roughly follows his life and his artworks. And yeah, it took me about 7 years to make it because I kind of transitioned over from graphic design really slowly into game development. And yeah, got the Screen Australia grant last year, which was fantastic, and kind of got me into be able to release it quite nice and big. So that was good times.
And for anyone who might not have an art sort of background or who might not know, who is Claude Monet?
So Claude Monet is an impressionist painter, and so impressionism was like roughly around the time, in Europe around the time of like 1800s, crossing over into the 1900s, before World War One, basically. And that kind of painting is like the stepdad of abstractionism, of abstract, or like the dad or grandfather of abstraction. So we're not, there's still landscapes. It's still, you can still see what's in that painting, but we're starting to get a little bit separated in the colors. So, they're not mixing the colors and making like neat, smooth objects. It's kind of rough painted textures. And so it was kind of like, this movement into like modernism and like changing art ways. And Claude Monet was kind of the center of that. In fact, one of his paintings, Impression Sunrise, kind of named the movement Impressionism. And so him and a bunch of buddies that he had, painter buddies from, that era in Paris at that time, kind of, were the forefathers of this movement, basically.
So right off the bat, we've got a pretty unique kind of sounding game, but
Yeah.
at its core, it's pretty simple puzzle platformer. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it uses it's kind of light on the platforming. It's not very difficult to run around the area. There's some like physics kind of balls and objects that you can move around. But in general, it's more about the puzzles. And so those puzzles are kind of loosely linked to the paintings and to art as well. So there's color theory, you're mixing colors, blue and red make purple, that kind of thing. As well as like moving things around in space and like reconstructing some of the paintings as well later on in the game.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me a little bit about, before we dive into your game in more detail, about your background in particular? What do you have an arts degree or something? The kind of games you grew up with, and I guess your inspiration, and what gave the idea for the Master's Pupil.
Right, yeah. My background came from art. Like I did a Bachelor of Creative Arts down in Wollongong. Like I was into painting, I was drawing as a kid, and then I kind of developed those skills and went into art. And for me, it was always like a grounded kind of experience or like education, so I could get this kind of uh, yeah, basically a grounding, a kind of like structure that I could work on afterwards. Because I then went into film school after art school, and at AFTRS in Sydney, and that was a way of me trying to like get. I've always liked art with like different forms of disciplines in it. So like film to me is about cinematography, it's about acting, it's about writing, it's all these kind of layered things that stacked on top of each other. Um, But the reality of making film is that you can't actually, you know, make film all that much. Like you're a podcaster, like if you could do this every single day, you would want to do it. So there's more of kind of there's less filmmaking if you're a filmmaker than if you were to do any other kind of art form.
You can't
And
really
so
you can't really make film after work, can you?
yeah, you can't. Yeah, exactly. You can't just like collect all your mates and quickly shoot like a scene in an hour. It takes, months of setup, and then over a weekend, maybe you could do a short film like every 6 months if you're lucky, if you're really motivated. Uh, but games, you can just do it for an hour every day. You can sit there in your bedroom and just go, whack away and learn something and construct something in a digital space. And so I used to play games a lot as a kid, up until like mid-teens or something. And then like social life kind of took over and distracted me. And then, around, it would have been what, 2011, 2012, a friend showed me Braid and Limbo, those two, puzzle platformer kind of games. And they just blew me away. They were kind of something that I hadn't seen before. Not necessarily the type of game it was, because I'd played 2D side scroller puzzle games before, but I hadn't ever played a game that like one person or a few people had made. Not since like early, Nintendo
The
days.
good old days,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, when there was like a group of like eight dudes in Japan just like, making hits.
Yeah.
Um, so having those games come out of this like that indie apocalypse that happened, in 2010 and afterwards, those like first wave of indie games, it kind of gave me this understanding of like, well, someone could actually make a game. Like I could make a game if I wanted to, right? And then I started fiddling with well, actually, around that time, I then got the idea of a game because I had played these games and I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about different projects I could work on. And then I saw these close-up images uh, of an iris, of a human iris, and they looked like these little landscapes, this kind of valley of different like woven, vines that would be this kind of dramatic landscape. And I thought that would be a cool game. I could set it in an eyeball, um, and then maybe it would also go over the course of someone's whole life, starting on the edge of the iris on the white bit, and then moving into the colored, landscape of this iris, and then through to the pupil over, towards their death kind of thing. So these are kind of broad concepts, but it took me a while until I actually started fiddling with actual game code and game engines and that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, that basically kind of got me into making games. So it was a very long process, essentially. But yeah, it was a very broad background that kind of got me closer and closer to games because, again, games are like those multidisciplinary, things like film or different art forms like that. But then at the end of the day, you get to play it. You actually get to like quickly run around and manipulate it, as if you were to go to like an art gallery and be able to play with the sculpture that's there. It's just not something that happens, but you get
Yeah.
to do that with games. So that's fantastic.
So I have a confession. So the idea of the eye and walking through the or traveling through the iris to the pupil, I knew that going into your game, but
Yeah.
it didn't click for me that the master's pupil, the pupil bit referred to the pupil of the eye. It didn't click
Yeah,
until this
like
morning. I thought it meant like the master's apprentice or something like that.
yeah, that's the beauty of it, right? So I had this name Iris. Like all my working files on my computer is called Hue Iris 2D, right? Because I had made all these different versions of the game. And I had made a 3D version that was kind of procedurally generated and like you ran across these like 3D worlds that you could, run through, and it was all about momentum. But I didn't know how to I couldn't understand how to make that into a game. Like I could make a fun toy, but I couldn't make like a story, so to speak, with inverted commas. So I I I went to 2D because it was this way of like um, sticking together like uh, what's it called? It was linear, starting at one end and it was ending on the other,
Yep.
and I could like lead players through this kind of environment, as well as set up like puzzles that made sense in like 2D space. And that was around the time that I had kind of decided to use Claude Monet, and so I could, use paintings, and they were all in 2D, and I could kind of start then painting the game itself. Um, but then I guess, and then like I had this name Iris because it was set inside an iris, and then the character could be called Iris, and it was all this kind of like, you know, stuck together really well. And it was called Hugh Iris actually, or like Hugh or Iris, I was unsure. But then a game called came out called Hugh, so I couldn't use that.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
okay.
Iris, and then Iris, I was like, oh well, that's good, that fits more, solidly. And then I found another game that was called Iris, and they had the hashtags and the handle on Instagram, I think. So they were using that, and I was like, oh, I can't be called Iris.
Damn.
So I went through all these different things, and my good mate Dean, um, he's a legend, and he was just like, I had all these names written down, and he was just like, we were just spitballing ideas, and he came up with the Master's Pupil, and he was just like, I was like, that's such a good like double pun thing going on there that I just thought, you have to use that, for pupil as well as a student, and then he's the master. But yeah, it's just too
It's yeah,
good. Yeah, he did such a
it
good
definitely
job.
fits. It definitely fits. It's a perfect name.
Yeah.
Do you can you just explain the relevance of or the significance of the idea of the iris and how that sort of fits in with Monet in particular?
Yeah, so there was a few things. For me, it's always like broadly, it's about like an artist and their eye and like how they see the world and all that kind of thing. But there was earlier on, I was thinking of a person that I could have whose iris this was, whose eyeball was actually, who owned the eyeball. And so originally I had ideas of, because my grandfather had macular degeneration and it kind of sent him blind, slowly blind over a long period of time. And so I thought, oh, that would be kind of like a personal thing that I could have in the game that would be tied to my life and tied to what I know. Um, and it's in the eye, and so I was picturing these like dark, blocky things that would kind of attack you or whatnot. Um, and then I realized that when the more I looked into it, that macular degeneration has nothing to do with the iris. It's actually like right at the back of the eyeball, and so it was kind of like, damn, that's something, that's something I can't use or like wouldn't work right. So but then that kind of clicked back with this other thing that I remembered, which is Claude Monet, who had cataracts quite famously, well, famous in his little circle. And he had, uh, surgery for the cataracts quite early on. And we're talking like early 1900s. So, you can think of that kind of surgery as being quite like cutting edge of the time. They're cutting open someone's eye really daintily and like sucking out all this goo. Like it's kind of quite like visceral. Like now it's just like laser surgery and whatever else, and I don't know, mini robots. But it's like this kind of like different thing entirely. But back then it was like this like cutting edge new surgery that was like happening at the time. And so I thought, well, this kind of folds in quite nicely. I could use Claude Monet, use his life, use something that I have like I was early 20s when this was happening, so I didn't have any kind of idea of how I could write an old man's life, the whole life of this person. Um, but having Monet is already, he's already lived, I can follow his life loosely. I can have a grounding for that kind of emotions. And then he's an artist as well, so I kind of had a connection with that. And then, this eye uh, problem that he has, these cataracts, suddenly became this kind of great idea for like the end game where you could get to the pupil and then climb up into this like cataract castle as for the final level of the game. And so that to me just like I've always referred to it as like a layering effect, the idea of a game set in an eye, the idea of it going over someone's life, that person being Claude Monet, and their eye, it's like all these
Yeah,
things kind of lapping on top of each
it kind
other.
of
So
fit
that to me,
together pretty perfectly.
yeah, and it was a way of kind of rather than getting an end point for the game and aiming for that, it was building layers and having them, you know, um, influence each other. So rather than kind of, paying attention to the end goal, you're climbing up the mountain. It's more about kind of stepping slowly and making sure that the path you're taking is the right way to get to the top, rather than kind of just heading for it, and making sure that all those things kind of are interconnected in the story, as well as how they connect to mechanics and vice versa.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those last couple of levels because the tone of the game shifts completely. But yeah,
Yeah.
and it's good knowing the story behind it because before you go in, because there's no text, there's no intro, it's not even a menu. You just sort of you load the game and you're in, and that's it. And then from there right
Yeah,
until the end, there's no like direct storytelling. It's all subtle and implied and abstract.
that's right. That's right. Like experiential, like there's no text, there's no language, um, there's nothing telling you what to do. There's no direction, other than the understanding that you've entered on the left and then you're going to the right of the screen. There's nothing else. And so for me, early on, that was always really important because it was a two-sided thing where I again that idea of like aiming for something, but then being informed about what you're making and making sure that it involves, the concept that you have up ahead, it involves everything that you're doing. So the concept that I had was that if I made a game without any text or any language, there's nothing to uh, pull. There's no every kind of meaning that you give to the player has to be something that they experience. So there's nothing that they just kind of read and go, "You're inside Claude Monet's eyeball, and now he is 3 years old." Like if that was the case, then it would be this kind of slow process of just like you complete a puzzle and then you read a bit of text and you complete a puzzle, and it's more like reading a book than it is, playing a game. And so yes, the whole point of Master's Pupil was to have kind of like no language or no uh, text that kind of describes what's happening in the game, because as a puzzle game, if you're telling people what to do, that's a, a puzzle that they're not getting the eureka moment. I used to call them aha moments or eureka moments, because there's that moment that you get to when you solve a puzzle and you go, aha, I've done it. I have solved it. And that to me is like golden. I love that feeling in puzzles. And that's one of the first things I wanted to recreate with a puzzle game. And so if you tell someone what to do in an environment, you've just lost that aha moment. And so for me, having this moment where is very, very simple quite early on, like that first level and even 2 levels, there's so much of that that is really, really simple that a lot of gamers would understand immediately. But a new player doesn't understand that this is a door that blocks them, but they just kind of like, oh, what's this like sniffy thing? And what does it do? And they kind of interacting with it and they're having like an experience rather than just above that little thing, that little sniffer guy, above that saying, this is a door and it will open if you are red. Like it's just kind of, it breaks the immersion a bit.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah. So I want to so I just want to circle back. So you've hand painted this game, and I saw one of your, I think it must have been on Instagram, one of your viral videos, and you come up and you say, "Oh, I hand painted a video game, and it took me 7 years," and your face just dropped. Like I could see the despair
Yeah.
in your eyes. But that line enough sold me on the game straight away. I thought, nah, shut up, take my money. And I immediately went to the Switch store and I downloaded it without really knowing anything about it. So I thought that was a really cool bit of marketing you did there. But I just
It
wanted,
was interesting because like that because that was one of the biggest viral posts. So like it was very, very fortunate to, I part of the grant was allowed me to get a plan, like, hire a company to construct a marketing plan, right? And it didn't tell me specifics, but it told me like things like before launch, you want to be posting every day, and that's you should be trying to do that like 6 weeks before launch. It's like posting every day and ramp up before that for the first few months, right? So there's all this kind of like strategy that I was being told, but I didn't know what to do. So I was just trying to make up stuff. And my brother Zach Naoum, he's also Zach Speaks Giant. He does like a whole bunch of D&D stuff. He's fantastic. Um, you should anyone listening, you should look him up as well. Plug my little brother. But he helped me because he's been doing a lot of social stuff for the last long 10 odd years, and so he kind of helped me, and he would just like we would brainstorm my different ideas that we could put up, and that was one of them where it's like because so often when I was painting the game and I was talking about people to people, I'd say the game's hand painted because to me that means that it's painted by hand. But then there's that term is thrown around a lot with games because it just means like, oh, I used my hand when I drew this. It wasn't like boxes on it with a mouse. I did it on a tablet, or some people even hand draw stuff and then scan it in and redo it online. But I was trying to get across that it was traditional painting, right? Which is a little bit like trickier. It's not as catchy. And so, but I'd say hand painting and people go, oh, cool, like, so you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
it with an iPad, and that led into that whole thing. And so that was a great post.
So yeah, because when I think of something that's or games that are hand painted, well, or hand drawn, I immediately think of pre-rendered backgrounds back in the old days from things like Final Fantasy and Donkey Kong Country, or even like
Hmm.
modern games today, things like Cuphead. I know that some
Yes.
aspects of that
Yeah.
was done by hand, but is your game different in the fact that you sort of did everything traditionally on a piece of paper? Is that the difference, or could you
Yeah,
explain?
essentially, it's real paint on real paper that I scanned in. And so that scanning process, I had to get this kind of like high res, like film negative scanner. It's kind of big, chunky box thing that was sitting on my desk for years. And so it was a way of kind of capturing that texture that's in like a real paint because, so many games are hand painted or they're drawn with by hand or they have various like real life textures associated with them like or applied onto a 3D object and they can make a realistic looking game. But my game isn't realistic, but it looks like a real object because that's the kind of like that's the difference of using a real life texture. So I could have like mimicked it online or like on a computer. I tried in various ways to kind of draw digitally because I knew how much of a hassle it would be to like hand paint it and how much paint I would go through and how much paper and how much longer it would take. Um, but I eventually realized that if I was going to fake it, it would actually take way longer to try and redraw all the little like textures and like differences that like real texture, like a real photograph would create, just by chance. Because the game itself, especially in the first level, before I had kind of really got into like cleaning up, my scanner bed and like the piece of paper, there's like dust and like little bits of hair and stuff that are like in the scan, like they're actually in the game that are
They're
there
in the
because,
game.
yeah, that first
Okay,
level has all these like
I'll have to look
specks of
out for
dust and stuff.
it.
Yeah. So, but that just adds this level of kind of, and I went and, I think I edited out a hair at one point, but like, I was touching it up digitally and I was creating, having to fix things up digitally, but really that kind of texture is just like, you can't really get it with a digital process. So that kind of traditional painting just allowed kind of a much broader thing. And in the long run, really, once I started really integrating Monet's paintings into the game,
And that's what I wanted to
having
ask.
his
Yeah, yeah.
having his chunks of painting in the game, suddenly they looked really clashing against anything that wasn't hand painted or wasn't scanned in like that. So there was that, enabling that kind of meshing was great.
And how did you get his paintings in there?
So they're all like online
So
images.
just
I
high
had a
res images. Yep.
Yeah, and often I would try and find a whole bunch of high res images because someone 10 years ago took a photo of it or someone scanned it in for some like um art event or something like that. They're all slightly different. They're all slightly kind of, you know, warped or changed or whatnot, or the colors would be out. So I'd try and get a whole bunch of them and like compose them all together and stretch them into place and make sure that they had this kind of consistency to them. Because, I've only been able to ever see a single Monet painting in my life, like in person. There's
Okay.
one in
Yeah.
the Yeah, there's
I,
one in the Gallery of New South Wales.
I assumed you
Um,
traveled the world and went to all these art galleries for inspiration.
I took a photo of each one. Yeah, got into the private collections. I had to break into someone rich person's house, go take a photo. Because yeah, like and there's because he was so obsessive with color, and color was his main thing. I wanted to be kind of true to that and make sure that those colors were being represented as close as I could. But again, there's so much differences between people's computers and people's screens. Um, and how their whole computer is set up. So that all changes. But I at least wanted to be consistent among the images because you can't have one image that looks like it's scanned from a magazine, 40 years ago, and then you have another image that's like, some high-res Google scan or something. So there's this kind of a happy middle ground that I had to kind of create between so they all fit in the same or looked like they were in the same world.
Yeah, okay. Well, I actually wanted to know a bit more about the publishing side of things. So you've spent
Mm.
a good portion of your life developing this game. How did you hook up with the publisher? Do you just approach someone and say, "Hey, I've got a game," or do you have to pitch an idea, or how does it all work specifically? I mean, particularly from an indie dev point of view.
Yeah. So early on, I decided from the very start, I was always like, I'm going to self-publish this game. I'm going to self-publish this game. That was my drive. I was like, there's no way a publisher is going to take the cut of my hard work. This kind of my mentality. Um, but towards the end of the game or production of the game, I realized that I needed it needed a lot of marketing, and marketing was in my mind hard and and very difficult to kind of get my head around because I'd been making this game. At that point, I'd only been doing it like full time for a year. But there was 3 years before that that was part time. That was like half of my days that were that. And then before then, 3 years before that, it was just like hobby time, like some weekends and most evenings and that kind of thing. So there was this like ramping up of doing development, and then I was finally doing it full time because of the Screen Australia grant, and I was suddenly like, I really want to be doing this, but then I have to go and do all this marketing, which is like completely different. So at the 11th hour, I decided to start going for like publishing, and it's hard. It's a hard kind of industry because there's I ended up going to GDC in San Fran, which is like the biggest game developer conference that happens around the world. It happens every year in March. And so earlier this year, I went. Essentially with the game built, it was, needed some polish. It needed a few more testing and making sure like some bugs were fixed. But it was done. And so I went and I talked to a bunch of publishers, and I also, met a couple on over phone, and talked to a bunch in over email. And if I was a good fit for the publisher, because that's one element, is finding a publisher that's a good fit. If I was a good fit, generally speaking, they weren't interested because the game was finished, the game was done, and for them, they wanted to kind of move with the game and have it be part of kind of like their story as a publisher
They
and
want
their
the
marketing
creative
team.
input as well. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, and not necessarily a strong creative input, but some they want to be connected with the way it's being built, and they can't just jump on at the end and sell it for you. That's not necessarily what they do. They don't just foot the bill for marketing, essentially. They want to kind of be involved. Um, and so then, all the rivers ran dry in that aspect, and I just didn't have a publisher, and so I had to self-publish it. So in that way, it was like I had fulfilled the dream that I had early on, which was self-publishing, but it was also not what I wanted by the end of the project because I didn't want to do marketing. I wanted to kind of, you know, keep developing and keep working on a game or a different game or the same game or whatnot. So yeah, it's a big process. But generally speaking, like because I went through the whole process, they are those things. You've got to find a publisher that fits your kind of game. You've got to know where your game is at, how long it's going to take to build, where it is in the kind of production. Um, and then you've got to pitch it at the right time. You can't be kind of, completed it. You've got to want to have a very heavy or strong portfolio either behind you that you know that you can do it, or a strong, prototype. So the game is like kind of done. It can be played. You can experience what it's like. Either as a demo maybe, or a vertical slice, which is like a very small demo that's like, they call it vertical because it's like it's got, you can play it. You've got development in place. You got some of the art, or you got all of the art, the sound, the music. But it's only a very small like section of the game. So yeah, you want to get those the prototype or the demo in place, and then pitch the game, and then they will help you fund the production of it.
So I didn't realize you were
Whereas,
self-published. I assumed that you had a
yeah,
publisher. Didn't even realize.
mm. And it's hard because then I had to fully convert to marketing in a lot of ways. Um, Early on, I made the mistake of like I I messed up and I didn't apply to uh, Steam Next Fest, right? So Steam Next Fest is that like demo showcase that they have on Steam, and it's awesome. But I messed up. I got my dates wrong and I missed it, right? And so I thought, and for me, that was one of my big marketing things. I wanted to get into Steam, the demo, because for me, I can talk about the game and I can write about the game and you can see images, but playing it is like a different thing. Seeing it all in movement and like actually getting to actively play with it, then you've got to kind of, it's a more interesting, it hooks you better, when you play it. So I thought the demo would be great, but I missed that date, right? So that meant I had kind of finished the game. I had this scheduled setup, and then I missed that date, and I realized that the next one was like 3 or 4 months later. So I thought, okay, well, I can just get into marketing for the next 3, 4 months while I do a little bit of the porting for Switch, Nintendo Switch, which I got another company to do as part of the grant. They could fund that. Um, Noble Steed, they're awesome. If you need porting or if you need help with the game, they're great folk. Noble Steed Games, and but they were helping me out with like uh, polishing the game and making sure that like doing user testing as well. Um, but yeah, so the point I'm getting to, I guess, is that with self-publishing, you have to kind of transition then into marketing. And because I had messed up early on, I actually had more room so I could transition into that and not have to kind of worry about getting it done or whatnot. But again, it comes with the privilege of like getting the grant. Like I was saying, I'm a graphic designer, or I originated as a graphic designer, and so have a company, and so we do like web development and stuff there. So I was able to work a little there and do freelance in that environment, and then work as a game developer, because the hardest thing with indie game dev is paying rent and and food for money, so money for food. So you got kind of like that's the cost of it. Really, is just the time it takes to develop the game as a whole.
So the grant allowed you to do a bit of that, pay for the marketing, and for the porting to the Switch, which you hired a separate company for. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right.
And then when it comes to putting it on Steam, what do you do? Do you fill out a form? Like, how does it work?
Pretty much, like, yeah, that's essentially what happens, so you kind of apply for or you sign up for like Steam, what's it called? These are the things that like, it's a process that is so, again, it's very like different from game development. It's like game publishing and game producing, because it's like this process that's all about like, so it's Steamworks, I think it's called. And so you set up, you apply for a developer account basically, and you pay like $100, and then you can submit a game. And it's essentially a way of them just like checking, that well, you have to have this much money to be able to, it stops people from just adding any game that they like. Um, and then you go fill out these kind of forms, basically fill out your bank details, fill out your, it's similar to like anything else that would imply that where you can earn money from. So whether it be like Etsy or, eBay, or like even Spotify, if you signed up for Spotify and put your own music there. all these systems are kind of the same because you just have to make sure that you're a real person, a legal person, and that you are exist in a world, under a country, basically, and then you have a bank account and that they can pay you with any kind of thing. And that's essentially it. There's not a lot of hoops. Um, Obviously, your program has to run. Someone has to check it on the other end. I think that's essentially what the $100 pays for, is someone to just like play it on the other end. It's like, yes, it loads. It's not going to tank someone's computer. It's not made of like viruses that's going to destroy someone's computer. And then you're good to go. Because the Steam ecosystem is very like liberal and allows you to do a lot of things. Um, and because you can submit kind of software on Steam, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be a game. Uh, Whereas, publishing for, say, Nintendo Switch is like this huge other, battle, basically, because
Because it's Nintendo.
that's why I got a, because it's Nintendo.
Yeah.
But also, like, like Japanese businesses, like I've been traveling there a few times, and Japanese businesses are very like, they're strict in a way. You have to follow their rules and like follow their systems. And Nintendo is exactly that. Like you sign up and everything has to be filled out exactly. It's this really complex system where you've got to make sure that like everything is lined up. Your store has to be filled out exactly right. Whereas, Steam doesn't care do if you don't submit your game properly to them. They're like, whatever, it works. You can have nothing on your store if you don't want. But I think because if you're submitting to Switch, people are buying it on the Switch store. They understand that like there's a quality that comes with Nintendo.
Yeah, the seal of
They have
quality.
the yes, exactly, the Nintendo tick of approval. So there's a lot more hoops to jump through for them, and a lot more kind of a lot more to fiddle with. A lot more to get right and get perfect. And outside of that, you have to have like a development kit from Nintendo. So you have to like buy a development kit. And that was part of what I used the other company for, Noble Steed Games. They've made Switch games before. They have a developer account, they have the developer kit, so they can like wire you know, this game that I have on their computer, they can wire it to an actual Switch that's like a slightly different version. Still runs on the same software, same hardware, but it's a slightly different software. It's like the developer software. So they could do that and they can test it and they can, make sure the controllers are working and all that kind of stuff, which does take a long time. It took like 3-4 months or something for them to actually complete that whole thing. But again, that was paid for by the grant. And so again, coming down to self-publishing, there's quite a lot of, that was one of the expenses too, because I was coming to a publisher saying like, all I need is marketing. I have, the game is finished. It's already coming out on Switch. You just have to put your name to it. And people were like, well, then why do you need us for, really? Because that's something a publisher can do too. They can connect you with someone like Noble Steed, and, port the game for you in different ways. So there's a lot of like different things that can, that a publisher can do.
And because you're self-published, does that mean, I assume that means you get a bigger slice of the pie when it comes to sales?
Yeah, exactly. That's something I probably should have talked about earlier too, is because like, obviously there is a deal that you cut with the publisher and what that means and how much money they take, essentially. That's what it comes down to. But there's also a kind of, and there's plenty of stuff online about this. So if there's any indie devs listening and you're weighing this up, check out the GDC files, check out like just look up, kind of publisher deals in gaming, because there's a lot of like leeway or a lot of kind of variance between a good deal and a bad deal. And, because yeah, there's the cut that they take, but then there's also kind of recoup costs. So, they might put in 100 grand at the start and then you don't get paid anything until the 100 grand is paid back.
Right,
And that
okay.
then what constitutes that versus, like what's in that 100 grand and what that kind of those recoup, includes, because they can dodgy publishers will kind of add like their clients, like their employees' wages to that as well. So people have to be paid before, there's all sorts of stuff that that you're on the line for just because the contract says so, and in a lot of cases too, publishers will, I think in the majority of cases, publishers will publish the game on their Steam account and then pay you not the other way around. You're not like getting a cut of the money and sending it to your publisher.
Right.
It's
Yep.
the other
Yep.
way around. So sometimes, if you got a really bad deal, say, you can have really inclusive, broad recoup, which means that they're just like, funding everything out of your game. And then you can have like 6 months or so of that. Um, Whereas like a good deal, for example, might be, they take upfront, they take like 70% until they hit their recoup mark, which is a set thing that is like exactly this amount for these sets of costs. And then you get the 30%, and then it flips, and then they get 30%. And once they're paid off, they get 30% and you get 70%. So there is these kind of like deals that you can get in
Yeah.
different environments. It just really depends on who you're talking to and what they're paying you basically.
And I was curious, what about sales? Like when a game goes on sale for like half price, who decides that there should be a sale on the Switch store or on Steam? Is that
It's the
like
developer for
so?
sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so I have to go in and set a sale. And again, a publisher might be doing that because that's kind of leaning into marketing as well. So you're kind of like you'll do a Christmas sale to get kind of a spike in sales at certain times. Um, and so yeah, that can be a publishing term too. They may not talk to you about that and then try and do sales all the time or whatever. That's again comes down to the terms
okay,
as
yeah.
well.
So how's the success of the game been? Has it been successful, or has it gone beyond what you anticipated, or tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely beyond what I was expecting, because this is a linear 2D puzzle game. So by linear, I mean that you can't like run around in an open world. There's no kind of like, it means that what they call replayability, like literally how much you can replay it, is pretty low because there's people speed running it online that
Yeah, of
they're
course. Yep.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, and they're just wonderful. But the game you start at the start and you end at the end, and that's the experience that you have. And so if you want to replay, then you can just replay that experience. And the game's like 5 hours long. It's a pretty nice little chunky game. Well, it can be longer, it can be shorter. Um, but I wasn't expecting the game to sell well. I was kind of going, well, this is a good way of getting myself into the games industry. I can make this game that's a little bit flashy and interesting and unique, and then I can, see how it goes and see if I can recoup any of my money. And whatever money I could get can go into prototyping the next game, and I can kind of experience what that's like. Continue this like full time, development that I was doing. So yeah, I wasn't expecting the game to go I was expecting it to sell some things, but I had no kind of understanding of roughly how much I was selling. And wish lists are a good example of that. So early on, you can see how many people have wishlisted the game before it releases. Like, this is just on Steam. And they say that, if you want to, for an indie game, you want at least 10,000 wish lists before you launch, right? And like I was saying earlier, I had kind of delayed my uh, my whole process of launch and for my marketing. And then when it got to close to marketing, but close to launch, I wasn't close to 10,000 at all. Like I was at like 2,000 or something. And I was kind of going like, oh, I can't really push launch again. I just got to kind of release this game to the 2,000 wish list and see what happens. And then those 4 weeks, sorry, before launch, I had the 3 posts go viral. So the first one um, hit 1 million views in a week. The second one hit 1 million views, I think, in another week or a few days less. And then the third one hit 1 million views in a day, and that one's sitting at like 8 or 9 million. And
Wow.
this was both on Instagram and on Twitter. Oh, sorry, Instagram and TikTok. And so these 2 posts on these 2 different social things were getting 2 million a week, and then that last one just went through the roof, and there was a cumulative people, there's up to about 20 million or so that was kind of knew that the game existed. And that is the entire like difficulty of indie marketing, is making sure that people know that the game exists, because you can make a great game and you can throw it out there and put as much into it, but the amount of eyeballs that actually see the game and know that it exists, that's the
Yeah.
factor, right? So then
Well,
I had
I'm living
hit
proof that actually worked. So because I saw that video and I just
yeah,
said, yep,
exactly.
purchase done.
Yeah. And the one that you saw, like that one that's the one that got, the 7 million or something because it's just like, yeah, it's sitting now. I think Insta it's 9 million, something like that. And it also put like, my followings went from like 2,000 on Instagram and now I'm at like 90,000 or 88 or something like that. Like the difference in scale went like wildly different. So
Yeah.
there was that kind of that was really bizarre. And it pushed the game sales up a lot and it pushed, the wish list went up to 10,000 just before launch. And then, within a few days it was up at like 20,000 or something. Um, but then, the sales went really well. They've been really well on Switch as well. So that was like the benefit of having that Switch. There's about two-thirds of sales is on that.
Okay.
And, it's essentially it's given me about a year and a half or so of like a pretty low wage, but that'll do. Like that'll get me through. Like working on more games. So it's yeah, like my expectation was very low. Like my dreams was that I could you know fund an entire game development studio, but like that's obviously not going to happen. That was just like pipe dreams. But then next down from that was literally just being able to keep doing full-time game dev and I'd hit that. So there was a lot of variance between those two of like it not selling and then selling pretty well. And so, I've hit selling pretty well or much better than anticipated.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I'm happy to
glad
be
to
able
hear
to,
that's the case. Yeah.
yeah, very
Um,
exciting.
are there plans to port to PlayStation or Xbox?
Yes, there is. We're probably going to announce probably any day soon.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, we're doing, like working with Noble Steed again, and we're going to do a Xbox and PlayStation. Xbox, what's the newest Xbox? Xbox One, and then
Series
PlayStation.
Series X,
Yeah,
S.
Series X. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. They're always confusing. It's
I
like
know. Terrible
stick with the
names.
numbers, dude. And then PlayStation 5 as well. So it's like that's been really exciting. And the success of the game kind of allowed them, and so, I did a kind of semi-publishing deal with them so they could kind of build the game. And that, there's a recoup thing and whatnot. So that's the kind of like, with once the game is successful in a little bit, then you can kind of broaden it out, as well as having a kind of like marketing um, you know, soapbox that I can get on and exclaim, hey, all the people that wanted this game, you can now get it on Xbox because it was a seven whatever multi-million views, but then there was also all the likes and all the comments that were just like bombarding for days on end there. Yeah, all these comments coming into the thing, and there was a lot of people asking for Xbox or PlayStation because they don't have computers and they don't have switches, but they're looking for the consoles that they have it on. So knowing that that market was there was quite exciting.
And do you think you'd ever consider doing a limited physical release, like limited run games or something like that?
I haven't really looked deeply into it, and there was a lot of people asking actually. Like again, when this kind of went wild, and there was so many people, commenting and stuff like, "Oh, when are you, are you going to do a limited run and whatnot?" Um, and I'm not kind of really sure because to me, like, I've never really needed like that's not been my jam. Like I don't know why. But the physical copies of games is like I kind of tend to play a game and then I'll put it down, and so. And when all these people are asking, I was really quite confused. But there just seems to be this culture with, especially with Nintendo Switch, about wanting
Yes.
to have the game
Yeah.
and making sure that you've got your version on your console and like, which is very sweet. It's very nice to hear.
Yeah. I'm in that
But I
same
haven't.
camp a
I
bit. Yeah.
honestly, yeah, yeah, and it's very much an old school thing, I think, as well. And especially when the more I've looked into it too, there's that. And you're into the retro games, so you know better than anyone probably is that like if you don't have the console and you don't have the game, you can't ever play that game again. And even when it
Exactly.
comes down to like, even it comes down to the right TV or the right kind of setup, you may not be able to play it either anyway. So you're getting to this point now, like, I've still got a Sega Master System tucked away in a box somewhere because, there's some really great games on there, but I haven't played it in ages, and I know that I need a like an aerial like connection, and like all of my computers or all of my TVs are just computer monitors. Like I don't have like an old school TV that
Yeah,
will
yep.
fit like an aerial keyboard. So I even know that that's going to be and then the thing with like the old school TVs versus like LCD and all that kind of the way things are, shown now, because so many of those old games look so much better on a I think you said it before in the preamble, but like the
The
CRTV, what is it called?
CRTs, yeah, yep.
Yeah, like all those games were designed to look like that
They
on
were.
those.
They weren't
And
intending for you to see pixels, really.
yes, exactly. It was all
Yeah,
smoothed out.
that's
Such
right.
an
Yep,
interesting
yep.
concept.
But yeah, the
And
idea
so
with the physical is, from my perspective anyway, is like I've played this great game, Master's Pupil. Um, will you release it on the PS6 and the PS7 and the Switch 4?
yes,
So I want to make sure
yeah,
I've got my copy and I've got it forever, because I might want to play it again in 10 years' time or something. Not that look, I've
yeah,
got so many games I'm never going to play again, but it's
yeah,
just that
yeah,
reassurance that I've got this game now and it's a piece of history and it's immortalized in my collection now and I can show it off.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so that was quite touching in a way to hear that there's people that like want it in that kind of solid fashion. And so yeah, look, I honestly haven't looked into what it would cost and that kind of thing, but
Yeah.
it's definitely interesting because it's a
There's a huge market for it. It's a niche, but
there's a
it
market.
is massive,
It's big,
massive market
yeah,
for that stuff. People get FOMO
and
and that
like
sort of thing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I also learned that there's like in different areas around the world they just don't like the I think India is one of them. So it's a very big market and they have a lot of Switch players, but they don't have a designated Indian Switch store. They have this
Mm.
kind of weird global store that only has a certain amount of games. It's like just the basic like big Nintendo games like Zelda and Mario and whatnot, but they don't have all the indie games in there. So to
Yeah.
get an
Okay.
indie game, you actually have to have the cartridge and nothing
Yeah.
else.
Righto.
So that to me is bizarre as well,
That is strange. Yeah.
But yeah, I've got to look into the price of it, and I've got to because I know that there are companies that do it for you, but again, I don't know
Yeah.
what it costs,
There's
what they take.
yeah. I'm
So
sure they're all different. Limited Run's a big one, but there's actually dozens of them, and it's way too hard to keep track of.
yeah,
Um.
right, okay.
So you've mentioned. I forgot to ask you this earlier. You've mentioned this grant a few times. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, yeah. So Screen Australia, for people who didn't grow up in Australia and haven't seen the logo plastered on like most TV or film, Screen Australia is a government funding body that kind of supports screen culture. So they've been doing a whole lot of film and TV, and then last year they set up a grant for games. It's the first federal grant that they've had in like a decade or more, or ever. I'm not quite sure on that, but they basically had, a set of like, I think it was like 10 million or something that they could divvy up into different games.
Wow. Okay.
And uh, yeah, so it was basically just like a lump sum that you got. Oh, well, it was actually broken up over milestones, but I applied for this grant. It was like this huge application. I had to, like, I was clocking all my hours of the game and how I worked on it. And that whole procedure of applying for that grant took about 85 hours of just like
What?
solid work.
Wow.
Yeah,
Must
but
be
if someone's going to give you
must be a Centrelink. Must be run by Centrelink or something, right?
exactly, and like that's the thing, right? So it's if someone's going to give you 150 grand, it's got to be worth
Yeah.
it,
Oh,
right?
fair enough.
You've
Okay.
got to
Yeah.
jump through the hoops. And so, there was the stuff that you would assume, so like a development plan that shows you what and how you're going to do it. A marketing plan is like how you're going to use that, well, because there's only a certain allocation that could be part of the whole. 10% could only be uh, used for marketing. You can't just like spend the whole money on like ads. Um, And then, you had to do what else was there was like a budget allocation kind of full document thing. You had to outline all the budget that you expected to use. And then there was like a 3 minute pitch video. So you had to do like a piece to camera where you described the game and told it what it was about. And then you had to like give like a full demo that worked and whatnot. Um, there was a couple of other things too. But
I'm so surprised that
it was.
I'm so surprised that our government has grants for video games.
Yeah, well, they hadn't. They hadn't for years and years and years. And so this one being the first one, there was this kind of, I was very early. I was still early in the dev scene because I hadn't actually released anything, obviously. Like that was my first game, and it was just me making this thing with my blinders on. And I was going to the occasional like meetup, like in Sydney, there's Beer and Pixels. There's a few other these different kind of like meetups for anyone to kind of go to. And so that was this process of like trying to suss out what existed in Sydney. And, there's a lot going on in Melbourne. There's even more. And like Victoria, Screen Victoria has had a lot of grants for games for quite some time. And
Yeah,
so,
okay.
and South Australia as well has them.
It's all
Not sure
the
about.
Labor states.
Yes, basically, because you're supporting the arts,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's taken a long time for people to consider video games as art. But I think what's ticking along now is that people are realizing that video games make a whole lot of money. Video games as an industry makes
Yes.
more money than the film and music industry combined. So there's this whole amount of money that we're just missing out on. And
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Australian government has supported, Screen Australia has supported all sorts of like big, Marvel movies come through.
Yeah.
Your big like Baz Luhrmann obviously tries and pulls all his productions here. Those kind of mentality because they know that they can just pull in a company and they're going to come here. And this one production company is going to spend, $100 million in Australia, and it's great for business. Whereas with a game, you can get one person if they have, or two people. Like you look at the Hollow Knight guys, they're from South Australia.
Yes.
They've earned millions of dollars for the Australian government, right? So they've kind of like, and they're just two dudes working out of a basement. So like, the industry is massive, and so at some point, some of the higher ups must have been like, well, we better start considering games as art, and we can kind of get the industry moving.
Yeah, good on him.
Um, yeah, exactly. And it just created this kind of like this. There's now this kind of alumni of like the first wave of those things, of those that grant. There's a whole bunch of us that have all applied and got this grant, and it, has immediately set up this small indie environment that is like happening in Sydney and in like around Australia essentially. A whole bunch of us went to GDC in like I mentioned in March, and so yeah, it's just suddenly this little community. And even though it took so long, it was very much worth it because, my girlfriend was like, I was unsure whether I was going to apply for it. I was just one guy making this one little game. And my girlfriend said, look, if you don't do it, you'll never get it. And you just don't worry about it, right? But if you apply for it and you apply for it as hard as you can and just go for it and spend the hours, don't wait till the last minute and just do something, throw it in. Do it as best as you possibly can, and you show what this game is about and what it's like. Then if you don't get it, then you were too small for the grant, and that you just have to wait until you're a bit bigger and whatever else. So I said, okay, I'll just do it. I'll just do it. I stopped work on the game and just spent, it was like 2 weeks of like part-time work to like really get it all, and just went hell for leather. And and then I got it, and it was like literally life changing. And I could go freelance. I could hire a company to port it. And like I said, 2/3 of sales come from Switch. So without that
Yeah.
grant money came and it paid for a group of people, their wages to do this thing. And then I got even more sales back from the thing. And they're all like, most of the sales come from America, come from, the UK, Europe, and that kind of thing. So, it's grants are these weird things that are like, you know, they're taxpayer money. It's taxpayer money, right? It comes and it supports the arts, but then it supports all this other people that are around the arts, and it's an industry. And so once these things grow and build and build, then it can start kind of, you
Yeah,
know,
of course. Well, yeah,
supporting the system.
I bet you're glad you applied for it in the end. Sound like it was
Exactly.
definitely worth your
Right,
85,
exactly.
85
And so
hours well
suddenly,
spent.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, and then I got like, I remember getting it, and I barely remembered what he even said. So Lee, who runs the game, the game arm of Screen Australia, he personally called everyone and was saying, that, oh, you've got the grant. You you're a successful application. And he started saying stuff, and there was like ringing in my ears, and I melted onto the couch that I was on. I was like, oh, so I completely crumbled, because it was just like, it's like winning the lottery or something,
Yeah.
like suddenly someone said, hey, and because it was Screen Australia, it wasn't just someone, it was Screen Australia that I had seen as a kid growing up, their logo on everything, all good films out of Australia, all good TV shows, stuff that wasn't Australian production, but still had like, an Australian show. It was a, American TV show or American movie, and it had the Screen Australia logo, and it's like partly shot and funded in Australia. You're like, oh, that's fantastic, right? I'd seen that as a growing up, and to have that body, that company give me the thumbs up, mind blowing. It's like suddenly I felt like spending what 6 years at that point making this like painted game. Suddenly it feels like it's worth it.
Speaking of winning, you won an award recently, didn't you?
Yes, yes, I did. Well, the game did,
Oh, the game did. Okay.
uh, the game did. I don't know. It feels kind of weird because I'm kind of like, do I take that? It's the game. I don't know. But yes. So the Australian Game Developers Awards, they are run by IGEA, which is like the what are they? Independent Games Entertainment Association. So they're like they run in Australia. I think that's it. I'm bad, but if you add show notes, you can link to those too because the Agdas and IGA are like this, like the awards show that the IGA runs, and the IGA are like they help everyone in the industry. They're just trying to make the industry better. But they've been running these game awards for 20 years or something. They're like it's quite a uh, fantastic award to be kind of even nominated in because when I got the nomination, I was kind of like shocked and like, that's fantastic. That makes again talking about another like thumbs up that you get. So one from Screen Australia and then one from the actors. I was like, fantastic. That's amazing. And then um, I'm traveling at the moment, like I mentioned earlier, and I was away from Australia, and they said, do you want to come and see the awards? And I was like, well, I'd love to, but I'm overseas and blah blah. Um, and they were kind of like, oh, you want to reconsider, like you want to really make sure. And I was like, but I'm not going to get it, so it's fine that I'm not here. It's like it's fine. Don't worry about it. And then my brother, who like I sung him praises earlier, he's been working in the games industry. He worked for Stray Gods, so he was part of the production team for Stray Gods, and he was working with them. And so he was there, and I was like, well, my brother's going to be there. I'll give him the notes of a speech. There you go. And
Just
then
in
when I
case.
don't win it,
Yeah.
it's just in case, that kind of thing. But then at the same time, I had this like cocky feeling, like, well, you know, the game is entirely so it was up for excellence in art, right? And I thought, well, the Stray Gods is up there, Gubbins was up there, two great games, and I was like, oh, sure. I think there's a third one. I can't remember. That's bad. But anyway, there's a lot of games out there that look beautiful, right? And I thought, well, they're all fantastic games, but my one is like unique. It's different. The whole game success has come off the having it, be able to be this hand painted experience and having a unique visual. So I thought maybe it is, but then they've given the pity vote for like the indie upcomer. Like let's give him the nomination and we'll give it to the real deserved games, that kind of thing. So I was going back and forth wildly, right? And then yeah, and then I got it. The game got it, and I was shocked, to be honest. I was kind of like, what is happening? Why? Like, very confused. And then my brother got up there and he got to do the speech that I had given him. So it was just kind of like really wild, wild time.
Did you say that your brother's game was nominated for the same category as well?
Yeah, so Stray Gods is that recent like musical RPG. That's quite a big team. There's like, the big team down in Melbourne. And so he was hired like late in production to like help out on editing videos and film the clips and the composing scenes for some
Right.
of these
Okay. Yep.
musical
Yep.
like videos for the game. And so he was there. He was working on it. He had been invited, completely separate to me, and he was working in the industry. So he was standing there next to the game, the art director of Stray Gods, and he was there like who was his mate that he's worked with, and so
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
was sitting there like it was very bizarre,
That
very
is
bizarre.
funny. I thought you meant it was your brother's. It was his game, and like you were going up against each other.
No, no.
Sibling
That
rivalry.
would have been
Yeah.
edgy. That would have been hard.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, congratulations. That's yeah,
Thank you,
massive
man. Thank
achievement.
you. Yeah, it's huge, and it's very strange. Like again, like I was saying, this game I was expecting to come out to a little niche group of people. You know, the Venn diagram of people who know and like Claude Monet and Impressionism, and the people that play, 2D side-scrolling puzzle games. Those two tiny circles have a Venn diagram of not very much overlay. Wasn't expecting much, and to have it come out so big and to then win an award is just yeah, it's above beyond.
So, what's next for you?
More game development. I part of what well, part of what I like to do, and part of what I think made the Master's Pupil a successful game, or at least in my mind, a good piece of art, is that I was working on it for quite some time before I even, conceptually, all those layers I talked about at the start of the podcast. That's what I think made the game good. And so for the last 3 years or so, I've been thinking of what else I can do and what else I can make. And, you know, outside of 2D side-scrolling puzzle games, essentially. Because they're fantastic, but games that I've been playing recently or lately for the last, 5 years or so have been much more kind of uh, toy-esque games, like Minecraft or Valheim. They're these games that are kind of like an open world that you have these systems that you experience and build with and kind of play with, a lot more playing. Whereas puzzles are this kind of literally a puzzle that you make and will try and work out. Whereas crafting, survival games are much more kind of they're a system, a toy that you get to kind of experience and play with. And even though they have like a story through them or a path of kind of what you experience, they're much more kind of something that you can like run around and experience in. So that's the kind of angle that I'm going for. And I've been kind of coming up with this like, story and whatnot for and layering ideas and making sure that they fit with the mechanics and like I did with the Master's Pupil and making sure that all these layers of story and mechanics and concepts and the way you play it are all kind of cohesive and fit together really nicely in their own kind of puzzle. Um, so yeah, and I've been, it's still early days. I'm been bashing my head against like, player controllers and how Unity is going to run this thing and all this kind of stuff. So Unity being the game engine that I
Yeah.
work with,
Yeah.
and so there's this kind of like yeah, very early days, but it's really exciting in a lot of ways because I'm starting a new project and it's all concept, but I've got a lot of it kind of mapped out, and so um, yeah, it's exciting, and then also really tricky because there's a lot of expectations to manage. Like I have been given this like golden egg, getting funding via this game, well, originally via the grant, and then now getting enough earning for a couple of years is like I get to kind of, experience what it is to like fully be a game dev from day dot and just construct a whole new game. Um, so that golden egg, I don't want to break it. I don't want to be kind of, I don't want to squander a good thing that has come to me. And so there's that expectations, and then my expectations of how. to build a game, and how quickly I can move through the process, because so much of building a game is like you'd have an idea and then you try and make that idea, and then the computer says no. The computer says that's too hard for you to do this way, or what you thought would do this does the opposite, and so coding and that kind of thing to me is still, I'm very much an intermediate, coder. I'm not a beginner, but I'm definitely not a master, and so I'm in the middle there, and because I came from art. I came from an art background, so coding to me is still an abstract way of thinking, and it's still difficult. So learning how to do these things is a process, a long process.
So you've spent 7 years on this game. It's finished now. Now that you've got a new project underway and you don't want to break that golden egg, what are you going to do differently this time?
I think knowing what I've known now about the publishing industry and how that works, I think I'm definitely going to go for publishing. So, and that again, like I said, if you have a good concepts in mind, you have a good prototype, you have a good story, you have a portfolio behind you, aka the master's pupil for me. So I get to come in and I get to a seat at the table now. I get to actually pitch a game to someone. Well, hopefully, and so that process and the plan for the next few years is basically to set up a prototype, set up something that is like consistent, that looks right, that feels right, but maybe not entirely fleshed out. And it's something that I can give to someone and say, like, this is what it looks and feels like now, and this is the plan that I want to do for it. This is how much money it's going to take. This is how much time it's going to take, and get someone to kind of, front the dosh for it. Because if I can make a game that is much more, replayable and much more like fitting in with like current trends, then it's going to sell a lot more. And if someone, and that's all just the plan for the publisher. They just want to get a game that can fit in their library and make something, make everyone their money back, and then hopefully more. So it's just a matter of kind of trying to find the right publisher and setting up the right scale of demo, getting the demo up to be a right level. But yeah, definitely publishing, and definitely kind of down that route this time.
I've got 2 more questions for you before I let you go. Number
Sure.
one, if you could have a conversation or speak to another game developer, who would that be? Dead or alive or whoever?
Oh, that's a hard one, because I'm really bad at remembering game developers' names.
Yeah,
Like I'll play a game, and I'm like, oh, I love that game, and then
All right, what about if you
and
think
then I
about...
completely. But I think I would. There is 2 people,
Okay.
being Jonathan Blow, who did Braid, because that kind of got me into indie dev, and he seems like a really fascinating dude, because he comes really heavily from coding, but then he has this kind of like puzzle mentality. But I also think his name's, I can't remember, Lou, but he's the guy that who created Journey, and he created
Okay, yep,
Flower
yep.
and Journey, and now he's doing the Sky project, which I haven't got into, but he just has this very interesting way, because Journey, I don't think I spoke about it earlier, and Journey was like a massive influence for me and for the Master's Pupil, because of just such an experience it is, like when you boot up that game and play it, it's just such a lovely, it's an experience. It is, there's nothing else that it could be. It can only be a game. You can't have that as a movie. It just wouldn't work. And so, or a book or whatnot, you have to play it and you have to experience it. And so that to me was this like wonderful world of what games could be. And so he's such a talented guy that created. I wish I could remember his name.
The Journey
But
guy.
he's such a talented dude. The Journey guy,
Yeah.
the Journey dev, and he was this kind of run and gun, created it. The first games he was making was through at uni, and then he kind of like branched out and started making games and made one of the first indie games for PlayStation. And so, yeah, he's just such an interesting guy. Definitely.
I've heard you talk about Braid a couple times, and I've actually never heard of... I played Limbo. I know Limbo very well, but Braid's one I've
Mhm.
never heard of, so I'm going to have to check that one out, I think.
Oh, it's fantastic, man. It's like it. 2D side scroller, and it's like it's all the it looks like Mario, like it feels like Mario, but then you can reverse time, and so
Mm,
it's different from like Prince of Persia, where you're like platforming and then having to like reverse time to like edit your mistakes. Whereas Braid is like you reverse time to edit your mistakes in that same way, but then to do a puzzle, you have to kind of drop something and then reverse time, and then some elements later on don't reverse time, and so like they stay still while you reverse and this kind of stuff. So it's layers of this like mechanic of just time reverse,
yeah.
and it is just so good.
Yep. No, you've sold me. I'm buying it. I'm an
And I
easy
think it's on
sell.
Switch. I'm pretty sure it's on Switch, so you
Yeah.
could
No, I'll definitely check it out.
yeah.
All right. Last question. What do you think Monet would have thought of your game? I mean,
I think
besides the fact that you're bringing him back from the past into the future to look at this
yeah,
weird
yeah.
screen, but aside from all that,
Yeah, if he understood, if he didn't get freaked out at the idea of a video and like, yeah, could understand it. I think it really depends on which Monet I brought back because obviously, like, I kind of researched his entire life and like old Monet was like a grouchy old man. Like he was definitely like stuck in his ways and like he was famous at that point too. So, like the French government like gave him like a ton of money to make like a series of artworks for like the war. Like it was like he was this like grouchy old dude that had like his garden and then would just like paint in the background and he was like eyes were failing and so he was really angry and upset about that. But then young Monet, when he was like being an impressionist and like putting on his own art gallery showings when that wasn't a thing, like he rented an old building, like him and his mates rented an old building and did a gallery showing in there. And that's like one of the first times that like indies did that, like before that it was just like the one place where art gallery showed or you would be showed, someone would buy your artwork and show them in their mansion. And that's really the only places that got sold. So he was like this like punk rock like painter back in the day. And I think if I showed him that, the young Monet, I think he'd be like, "This is cool, man. Way to go!" And that's a cool haystack. I'm going to do that later in my life. But then you
he
don't
drew a
want
lot
to
of
set
haystacks,
up a
didn't he?
whole time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Man, I really went far in the haystack stuff. Yeah. But then am I setting up some kind of awkward time loop? Is that going to mess with the space-time continuum? I don't know,
Nah,
man.
don't worry
Who
about it.
knows?
I'm sure it's fine.
Don't worry about it. It'll be fine.
Pat, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. All the best in your future projects, and really enjoyed your game. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to just tell everyone where they can find your game? We've
Yeah.
already spoken
Well,
about it a
first of
few
all,
times.
thanks very much. Well, thanks very much for having me. First of all, it's been great talking to you. But yeah, the Master's Pupil. It's on Steam. It's on Switch. It's coming soon to Xbox and PlayStation. And you can get it on those platforms. The Master's Pupil. You can also get it. There's a website, themasterspupil.com. It's got a lot of information on it. My tags are at Pat Naoum Games on everything. I don't know. Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter or /X. And yeah, play the game. It's we've got a Discord up as well. Come say hi and play it. Tell me what you think. It's I'm very proud of it, and I want people to play it. And yeah, go get it.
Go and get it. It's definitely money well spent, and yeah, really enjoyable. 5 or 6 hours. Yeah, spot on.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for listening in today. You can reach the pod on Instagram, semi.occasional.pod. On Twitter, it's semi-occasional-pod. You could leave us a review or a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That would go a really long way. 5 stars would be preferable, but I'll take
Always
4.
preferable.
I'll take 4 stars. But thanks everyone for listening in. Thanks Pat for your time and all the best.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.